Hey, what's up? Andy here. Today I want to do something a little bit different and share some pro tips on mixing, which I personally have found to be game changing. Mastering can only do so much, so it's imperative that the mixdown is as good as possible prior to the mastering stage. I've got a track here that I've been working on and mixing recently, so I'll use this as the example track as we work through all the different tips. Okay, let's get started. One of the most important tips when mixing is to remove unnecessary low-end frequencies from non-bass elements. Take this hi-hat loop for example. It has stuff going on in the really low frequencies which is not needed and takes up space in the mix. Leaving it here will cause the mix to be muddy and reduce the amount of volume we can achieve overall. For any non-bass instruments, I would recommend adding a high-pass filter or shelving EQ to get rid of or reduce frequencies which are not required for the instrument. For some instruments, it's important not to remove all the bass, as you may lose some of the character of the sound. Warm pads would be a good example of this. For these types of instruments, try experimenting with a shelving filter rather than a complete cut. When it comes to mixing, there are many important steps, but none more important than the balance and volume between each sound in the mix. Learning to balance a mix takes time and practice, and it's vital to have a good monitoring environment. Some producers like to mix in headphones as they offer more detail than using regular studio monitors. I would recommend using both and finding a compromise between the two. Starting with the kick drum and then balancing all sounds against that is usually the best place to start. Another effective technique is to balance the mix while in mono rather than stereo. This can be done in most DAWs easily, either by using a plugin on the master channel or setting the master to mono. The reason this works well is that some stereo sounds can give a false impression of higher volume, and this is not present when playback is mono, making it easier to mix more accurately. Grouping similar instruments together allows you to mix those instruments first, and then with the rest of the instruments in the song. This allows for quick overall adjustments to the balance. For example, grouping all the bass instruments together allows you to balance the bass of the track quickly, while maintaining a uniform balance between each bass sound. This is especially important if you have multiple layers of bass lines forming one sound. The same applies to lead synths, drums, pads, and any other group of sounds. The sub-bass of a track, especially in electronic, trap, hip-hop and similar styles, is really important to give fullness, energy and warmth to a mix. But since its fundamental frequency lies under 100 Hz, it's actually quite hard to mix, unless you have a dedicated subwoofer. Your neighbours might not appreciate you having a dedicated sub for monitoring, but your mixes definitely will. Leaving the task of balancing till later in the project can create a difficult mixing session at the end of the production stage, so my advice is to balance as you produce. Unless of course you're mixing a band's multi-track recording, in which case you would have no other option than to do it post-production. My final tip on balancing: don't put volume automation on the channel fader. Keep the fader free for making volume adjustments. If you need to automate the volume of a channel, use a gain plugin instead at the end of the insert chain and automate that. Effects like reverb and delay are great to thicken the sound, add depth and dimension to our mixes. However, these can result in a lot of space being used up in the mix. To combat this, we can put an EQ on the effect send channel after the effect plugin, or by using the effect plugin's built-in EQ if it has one. Normally I would use both a high pass and low pass filter to remove unneeded frequencies without losing the nice effect they bring to the overall mix. Doing this will clean up the mix by leaving more space for other elements to be heard clearly. Sidechain compression is one of my favourite techniques for achieving a clear, transparent and dynamically interesting mix. In simple terms, you're using one sound to control the volume of another sound via a compressor. This means you can automatically make one sound play at a lower volume when the other sound plays, and when it stops playing, the other sound will return to its previous volume. This technique is commonly used in dance music to create a pumping feel to the track, but it also works great for pushing a bass line out of the way when the kick drum plays for a clearer bottom end, or taming lead synths when a vocal should be taking centre stage. Here's how I use sidechain compression in this mix to create space and separation between two sounds and prevent them from masking one another. This final tip for this video is something I find works for me, and may be down to the way I EQ or don't EQ my instruments on a personal level. The frequency range of 200 to 500 Hz is generally the area which contains the mud in a mix. Carving a little out of this area over the full mix can transform the sound, making it clearer, crisper and more transparent, even with as little as -2 dB reduction. Here's what I mean. You may want to experiment doing this at the instrument channel stage instead, but for me it's a quick, simple and game-changing mixing tip. I hope you found the tutorial helpful and it will allow you to do better mixes yourself. If you enjoyed the video, please hit like and also subscribe to our channel for more Captain Plugins tutorials. Thanks very much for watching and I'll see you in the next video.